Every day, thousands of people board international flights thinking about beaches, business meetings, and bucket lists. Very few people think about embassy locations. Few think about hospital systems, and almost no one thinks about what they will do if they're told to shelter in place in a country that isn't theirs. Recently, tourists in parts of Mexico were advised to remain inside their hotels due to instability. Flights delayed, movement restricted, information fragmented. That's not a political conversation. That's a preparedness conversation. Because when you travel internationally, you don't just leave your household behind, you leave behind your systems. Today, we're talking about what smart travelers can do differently. Stay tuned. You're listening to a Disaster Class podcast by Instinct Ready Emergency Management. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Disaster Class, the podcast that's dedicated to helping you educate, prepare, and equip yourself for life's disruptions. I'm Jason Perez, and with me today is Jason Martin, a.k.a. Pappy, and Anthony Escato from the Disaster Operations Group. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's good to be here.
Good afternoon, all.
So today we're going to kind of do a little roundtable discussion, and our focus today is going to be international travel preparedness. Not alarmist, not fear-based, but prepared and realistic. And we're going to briefly consider it in the context of what's going on right now in Mexico, right, with the shelter-in-place advisories that are affecting many tourists there in Mexico. And we're not going to be debating geopolitics, but we're going to examine what happens when everyday travelers suddenly find themselves in a disrupted environment that's not their home. So let's get right into it, because the reality is that international travel increases exposure, and it really decreases our control. So whether, when you're out traveling, especially internationally, you're outside of your healthcare system, you're outside of your emergency response infrastructure, your legal framework, and your support network. And so preparedness in this environment, it's not paranoia, but it's just being realistic and pragmatic with what you're dealing with, because you're leaving behind the systems that you know and you're familiar with. So let's start right at the beginning. Before you even get on a plane, what should you actually be thinking about in terms of preparedness? Anthony, maybe we could start with you. You have some international travel experience, especially from your time in the military, and specifically talking about embassies and being registered with your home embassy. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me here, Jason and Jason. Um, yeah, one of my best practices has always been of just reaching out and I'll speak from my perspective, and I hope that you listening are hearing this from your perspective as well. Me as a U.S. As an American citizen, I would reach out to the local embassy of wherever my destination is. At that time, the STEP program didn't exist. It would literally be a generic number that you would call, give your itinerary, your location, and they would have you on this list in case of something happen. That would be my best practice, at least my initial step, and that would include anybody in my party that I would be traveling with.
So let's stop there for a moment, because you use that acronym STEP. So let's define it, especially if our listeners are listening here in the U.S. This is a specific program through the Department of State. So can you specifically tell us a little bit about what that program is and what its purpose is?
Sure. So STEP stands for Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. It's a free service that allows U.S. citizens to register their trip to the nearest embassy or consulate from what they're staying. Um, what it does is it allows you to be on a list and have a common data point for consular information program. So behind the scenes, in case something happens, the State Department uses these combinations of either determining if there's something large scale happening in the area where you're staying or in country that you should be informed, or in case something happens very large scale or according to their triggers, right? That you would then have to either be told to shelter in place as you just opened, Jason, or evacuated in worst case scenario.
Right. So, what are when we think about, especially right now, the situation in Mexico, um, someone having enrolled in this program, what are some of the benefits that you would say come to doing this?
So the benefits of this program is really to have that reliable information coming from a government agency. I think sometimes, especially, well, not sometimes, I think we can all look at any recent emergency news, local, global, and if you read it within the first, I would say, 5 hours, which in an emergency, 5 hours could be an eternity. But any news coming out in 5 hours usually changes drastically, right?
Right.
Having notifications coming out from your embassy that you know it's an actual program that they're here to look after you. You're gonna be receiving verified information with specific instructions on what to do, or where to call and whatnot.
Right. So, especially as we think about, right, the events that were happening in Mexico, a lot of like those shelter in place orders came from the Department of State, from the embassies. And so having now, we always talk about it, right, in the context of emergency planning and disaster preparedness, information is critical. So having access to information, and then also now being, if you need to get out or there's a situation that develops, having contacts that you can go to in that time of crisis. So, excellent. It's definitely a really good starting point. So, and it's actually something I had never really thought about until our conversations offline and in preparing for this episode. Sometimes we take some of these resources for granted, so it's good to be acquainted with it.
Yeah.
So let's move on to so maybe that's step one, right? And then if you're not within the U.S., if you're in another country, we have listeners in other countries. We have in Europe, in Australia, we have listeners from all over the world. So maybe step number one for you is if you're going to be traveling internationally, what resources does what does your government have? Where you're traveling, does your country have an embassy there, and what resources are available to you? And then how are you going to get reliable information? Because as we say, right, information is really crucial.
Yeah.
So let's move on to now maybe some prep work we're doing. So you got the tickets, you got the dates, you're getting ready to go. Maybe you're going to go to the beach, whatever. What are some of the things that you should have and on you prepared, especially documentation wise? Maybe Pappy, can you help us out with that?
Sure. And this is a lot, and especially for families with kids. Yeah, and the smaller the kids, the more important this is to really make sure that you're taking care of these things. So making sure that your passports, that they're not going to expire anytime soon. You don't want any issues, especially if you're caught, like in these situations, and you're caught staying there longer than expected.
Right.
You can have some issues, and you don't want anything that you could have controlled to hinder your stay or your return home. So having those passports, make sure that there's, that 6 month rule is a good one to follow. But not just a physical copy of your passport, but have some digital ones. But also, I know that when we've traveled, I've made photocopies, and I've got photocopies in multiple places. I have multiple copies, suitcases, my wallet, an EDC bag that I've got, whatever, so that if one gets lost, I've got others. And also with those that I'm traveling with,
Right.
Especially if you've got minors, you want to have copies of those. I also leave copies at home so that a picture can be taken or scanned in and emailed or something. So if we lose them, somebody at home has those as well. I mean, that you don't want those
Yeah.
those issues. So that's a really good start, is making sure you've got plenty copies of your passport.
Yeah,
But then,
that's a great tip. And I like the digital idea too. So I've taken, when I've gone, I've taken pictures of
yep,
my passport, my state ID, and then I have it stored in the cloud too. So if I lose my device, I can
Yep.
still
yep.
access it. So
Yeah, I never travel with only one device. I've got multiple, and they're all logged into the same cloud resources. So yeah, and then even going that far as having everybody's passports and other documents, IDs, accessible to me, my wife. As my kids got older, they could have them as well. So they're in multiple places. Don't just leave it to one source. But also the same thing is with your credit cards, debit cards, whatever you're going to be using overseas, is not just having one. Because if it gets lost, if it gets if it gets hacked or something, you don't want to be relying on just the one. So make sure you've got multiple. And if it's a credit card, that you've got enough open balance on there that you can sustain an extended stay if need be. You don't want to have to be calling back home to the bank and dealing with that. That's a bigger hassle. But and going
that's
with that, letting them know that you're going to be gone first too.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Yeah, you don't want to be overseas and have your card declined, whether it's a credit card or debit card declined because somebody's got this card and he's here in Missouri and his card's being used somewhere in Europe. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
um, yeah, I don't know why my mind just went to that Office episode where they're in Puerto Rico and Kevin's answering. Sorry. But that was an interesting point you brought, Pappy, too, because I just, my mind is going to now thinking about the context of the situation in Mexico. And, you have a family and now they're stuck there longer than
yep,
they have, and making sure they have access to funds to be able to sustain themselves for that prolonged period of time. So
yeah,
definitely a good tip. Anthony, you had.
Yeah, so one of the things that I would do, think about it as almost as your everyday routine when you wake up, right? The first
yeah,
thing you do is you look at the weather, that now you also all of a sudden with the weather you potentially have, what hazards are in front of you. So with that, that's how you might have now special considerations on your day-to-day walking, almost that MSS mentality, right?
Right.
right,
So one of the things here at Disaster Operations Group that we created is Has Assist, which it's free, it's a free tool. Hopefully it'll be posted on the bottom here.
Absolutely. I was waiting for the Has Assist plug. No, we were going to do it anyway. So this is good timing though.
But HasAssist allows you to plug in any location from around the world, and it'll be able to identify the immediate hazards for that location, the time of the year, severity, so on and so forth. And you could create a plan for as a family or even as a business, right? Because I think sometimes we think a lot about individual preparedness, but not it might be a business trip, right? And
mm-hmm,
how are
Right.
we staying connected with our parent organization, with our stakeholders,
right,
locally or internationally when we're traveling?
Right.
And then that individual carry, that special considerations, I have like a uniform list that I always have with me. And think about the same pace framework for communications of your everyday carry. So I don't think any of us can live without a digital footprint. So your cell phone is like a have to, and
mm-hmm,
that seems pretty obvious to everybody. But then what's the second thing that happens, especially when you go out of the country, especially not in common areas? Power, right? So
yeah.
having that alternate power for your electric device, without it, you're all of a sudden your cell phone just becomes a paperweight around,
And
an
especially,
expensive paperweight.
yeah. And
Yeah.
especially making sure you have the right plug for like the European
Exactly.
Yeah.
style. Yeah.
And then think about certain contingencies in your cell phone. Do you have at least an offline map that you hopefully got off of Assist, or however you did some research before you're going to the area? You know the area or the resources that are around from the areas where you're staying of where your itinerary is if you're not in a static location while you're there. What is the emergency contact? I think Jason, we spoke about this offline. Like, is it 911? Is it
Mm-mm, no.
911 referring you to a specific number and then maybe there's others, right? Have that mentality before. And of course, as Poppy mentioned, always have that physical currency of whatever sort you can. If you can't get your if you by any chance can't get into your bank account or whatnot,
Yeah.
whether it be the local exchange in case maybe somebody doesn't want to take US dollars or from wherever you're traveling, try to have that local exchange as soon as possible.
So
Yeah.
here's
100%.
a little a tip that I learned. Yeah, we've done a lot of international travel, and one thing I always, especially here, go to some places worrying about pickpockets and things like that, and so losing, like, if you have your ATM card, and so having your debit card and being able to access cash. For physical currency is good in some of these places, and sometimes maybe a lot of places, depending on where you're going, maybe they don't take credit cards. So what we did was I got a separate debit card for my bank. I opened up a separate account that this particular card, and then I could transfer money into it like in small amounts. So that way, if that card was stolen or God forbid held up at gunpoint or whatever, and that way they're not accessing, it was only tied to one specific account and they couldn't access all my other accounts.
Right.
So that was
That's a
just
good
one
idea.
one one thing that we learned when we were traveling.
That's great.
We had a designated card for that particular situation. So and then I love, Anthony, too, offline access, like you talked about maps, because I remember when we were doing some traveling, we had our international package with our cell phone, but the service was a lot worse than what we were used to, and the data connection was a lot slower. So just because maybe you have an international package doesn't necessarily, it might be the same capabilities that you're going to be used to in your home country. So
Yeah.
having offline maps in that case was really big, because now trying to load Google Maps or something like that, and you don't have those offline capabilities, it was taking a really long time to load in certain areas, and so it was made a huge difference in having those pre-downloaded when we had access to Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that kind of triggered something in my mind. Like, as when you're like, now you have all these things, right? You have your planning, you have all these things packed, whether on you or on your bag. One of the things, right, as we're even buying our trip, that we now all have that actual uh recommendation on the bottom is, do you want insurance for this flight,
Right.
Yeah.
for this travel? Read what you're actually buying. You might not be buying the protection you think that you're getting. If
Yeah.
something happens, you're not getting a helicopter's not falling on the top of your hotel and extracting you. That's not what it is. Like, read the footprint, read what it means. If you're not sure, call and make sure that whether it's $15 or $100 that you're spending on it, make sure that you know what you're spending your money on.
Right.
Yeah.
That's good.
Uh,
Good call out there.
Yeah, that fine print can really bite you if you're not paying attention to what you're actually getting, because
Right.
it can be such high level insurance that even your common instances isn't going to cover, and you don't want to have to pay for that out of pocket as you're going into a medical facility and you need some care.
Yeah.
Right. And it might not cover medical.
Right.
It might only cover if your flight is canceled or if you need to change your flight, right?
Right.
Like, I've had it worked for me because I know what it's been used for, and then I'm having someone next to me that thinks that they can switch their flight, and it was the opposite. They only had medical coverage while they were abroad. They had no coverage to change their flight for no
Yeah.
emergency at all. So you just got to be mindful of those things.
And two, some of these destinations, they require proof that you have medical coverage before you even get there.
Mm,
So before while you're planning your trip, and this isn't with if there's an emergency or something like that, but this is just general knowledge. Some locations require X amount of money on hand, X amount of insurance coverage. So if you don't have those and you're planning it, then you really need to do your research.
right.
So let's now let's get into we had some really good points there. Let's get into some one thing that I think is really important is, and we kind of nice transition talking about insurance, is medical preparedness. Because going overseas, healthcare systems are different, healthcare capabilities are different, and so thinking about that and what you're not taking for granted what you have access to here may not be available where you're going. One of the points we had mentioned here was medication runway. Right. So if you're on prescription medications and you're traveling overseas, making sure you have enough of a supply with you to last the entire length of the trip and then some. Again, we're looking at the Mexico here, and maybe there's some tourists now at these resorts, whatever, and now they're having to shelter, having to stay longer than intended. Well, if they only brought medication now for the original stay and not factoring in now this unforeseen event where now they're having to stay longer, and now they're running out of medication. And then the other factor is, well, the medication that you have, you might not be able to get in that country. Or will there be a way to be able to fill a prescription there? Right. So all these different logistics, and not assuming that you're going to have access to some of these things, is something to think about. So making sure you have not only for the time, but even extra in case you need it.
Because some of these, if you don't have enough, like a diabetic, and they've got to take insulin. If they've only brought enough for their vacation, and then they're out of insulin, and then they require medical treatment, they're in a whole nother hurt because of that lack of planning. So making sure, I really like that call out, because you've got to make sure you've got. I just, when I travel, I bring my entire bottle of medicine, and if I'm close to running out before I leave, I've gone and talked to the doctor to get more, because I don't want to run out of meds.
Yeah.
And it's those special considerations, right? Like, I think we have this fresh in our minds with the recent unfortunate events that happened in Mexico. But something as simple, even as an extended stay due to delays, right? All of a sudden you had a
Right.
layover, stuck in that layover due to several other cascading impacts and no flights. What are you doing now? You didn't run into an emergency at your destination, but now coming back, you are kind of you went from an inconvenience to a personal emergency by
Right.
not potentially being prepared with those special considerations.
Right.
Yeah. It could just even weather delays,
Correct.
some of
Yeah.
like the snowstorms we've had here in the East Coast. So, doesn't have to be a big catastrophic event, but even just little disruptions. Yeah. One thing, I'll just relate a little brief story, just kicking off something you said earlier, Anthony, in knowing, right? So now you're being familiar with where you're going and what resources are there and what capabilities there are. Like here we have in the United States, we have 911. But that's not going to be, if you go to another country, is not going to be 911. It's going to be something different. So what is that number? We were in a country once, and I actually, and this was a learning lesson for me because I didn't research that ahead of time. And we came into a situation where we encountered an individual who was having a medical emergency. And I didn't know what the number was. And then now, again, those having the access to your phone and the data was sketchy, not now trying to look it up. Um, Luckily, I went outside and there was an ambulance coming down the street that I was able to flag down. But then, even then, now the language
Right.
barrier trying to explain what was going on. So it was just like it was right place, right time, being able to get help. But then after that, it was like a learning lesson for me. Well, I need to know what the emergency number is for this country. And then turns out they don't have just one number like we do here in the United States. They had three numbers, one for police, one for fire, and one for EMS. And
Oh,
so three
wow.
different emergency numbers. So the point is wherever you're going, be familiar with if something happens, how are you going to get help? What help is available?
Hmm.
And then, you know, maybe writing them down, right? Because especially here, 911 is so ingrained in our heads, we don't even have to think about it. We go, oh yeah, call 911. But under the pressure, under the adrenaline rush, you're probably not going to remember what it is. So making sure you maybe write some of these down, maybe have a little physical travel emergency plan can help.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you brought up the language barrier too, because granted, a lot of countries around the world, there's a amount of their population that speaks English. For those of us that travel and English is our only language. But if you're somewhere where they don't speak English as a primary language or even a secondary, making sure that you've got uh, and again, not relying 100% on your phone for that translation services, but a book that you can carry with you that's got common phrases, English to whatever language that you're going to be that's spoken in that country, so that in the event you're able to communicate or at least get your message across to some degree.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's awesome.
So one other thing, when we think about international travel, it's a lot of it is the same principles that we would do here in our home country, in our hometown, right? We think about evacuation, right? Knowing our resources, knowing our risks, doing some of that research ahead of time, plugging into Has Assist and seeing what those risks are, right? But then developing a little plan. Where are we going to be staying? Does everyone know the address of where we're staying? Does everyone have contact numbers? So it's like if we get separated, they know how they can get back to the hotel, or if something happens, we're going to meet at this location. So a lot of those same principles that we would do even here in our home country, we can implement those decisions and those practices where we're going. Just another, it's not listed in our in our notes here, but a story came to mind of something that happened to some friends. So knowing a little bit about the legal system of the country where you're going, and some of the laws are going to be different. And
Yes.
making sure you know some of those things, because sometimes the penalties, maybe something that we take for granted where we are from, might be culturally and legally have different implications. Just one example: we had some friends from Europe, and where they live in Europe, it's legal to drink alcohol in public. So like you can go to a park and you can have alcohol in a public park and it's no big deal. And there in their home country, it's totally normal and totally fine. Well, they were doing some vacation in another country, and they decided, oh, well, it's a nice day. We're going to go have a little picnic, have a beer or some wine or whatever they were doing. And that was like a big no in that country, and they were about to get arrested. And luckily, there was a local was able to get them out of that situation. But it just goes to show being familiar now also with the legal, with some of the laws and different
Yes.
customs and the culture, because you don't want to get yourself into a situation like that.
Yeah, you don't want to land in jail.
I just had this conversation with my brother. He goes on vacation every year for his birthday in February, and he just had a layover because of the winter storm. Unlucky for him, he was diverted to Dubai, so he got stuck there for a week. I don't feel sorry for him. And he literally sent me a picture of a sign because it's also, I guess, a lot of people continue getting in trouble, and to inform the local tourist of You can't hold hands. You can't show public affection.
Yep. No
Mm.
PDA.
Um, so that's also something that's very culturally different, right, from a lot of Western countries that all of a sudden you do something very innocently and you don't realize that it might be even in your mind as a simple crime when it could be a very offensive crime,
Right.
that we're not even talking about spending 24 to 48 hours. You might be actually serving time for
Right.
something
Right.
like this. So what we think is simple, don't assume that is such simple crime or whatnot, as you alluded in your example, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, definitely important tip because you don't want to end up behind bars for something that could be prevented. So,
Yeah. I
excellent.
want to back up to the comment you made a few minutes ago, Jason, about having information, contact information,
Right.
and going back to preparing with kids.
Mm,
Especially minors who may not remember phone numbers or addresses of where you're staying, stuff like that. They need to have that on their person and in a way that they're not going to lose it. I know parents will put a safety pin with that inside a jacket or somewhere on their person so that the kids aren't going to lose it by playing or whatever. That's a lot. I can't even imagine if I was on vacation and one of my kids when they were little disappeared. I just that's the last thing that any parent wants to deal with. So that's part of the preparation that we should even be doing on a vacation here domestically, but
right.
even more so internationally.
Well, I'll admit to something on that, Pop, and thank you so much for bringing that up because even me as a new parent, I have a 3-year-old, and I recently bought a $15 Galaxy tracker. It's
Yep.
an app, and I leave it in her book bag. But even to your point, Poppy, like if you're traveling, when you're traveling, just having that something like that with their personal bag on them that
Mm-hmm.
you can always trace on your phone, whether you're tracing personal belongings. There's no monthly subscription, and Samsung is not paying for this. This is just a personal
Maybe
use
they
that
could
I
be.
Yeah.
have. But
They can though.
this is what I use, and I literally track it from my phone. So I literally, even if I'm not home, I know when she's getting prepped to come home. I know when
Yeah.
she's getting home. And yeah, it's awesome. I highly encourage anyone to explore this, especially with kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
We won't.
And
We
Apple
won't
has air
have.
tags.
Yeah, and we won't have the Apple versus Android debate on
No.
the air. We'll save that for offline.
Uh, Android, of
We'll
course.
save our listeners. It's two
This might be
against
the
one,
last. This
Anthony.
might be the last time we have Anthony on the podcast. No, that's yeah, definitely great tips, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you have kids. So good call
I,
outs there.
I even heard of a shoe manufacturer um, that started putting slots in them for air tags, specifically designed for air tags.
Nice.
So in case your shoes get stolen, no, I'm thinking it's more to keep your kids on. I mean,
Yeah,
that was the line on the commercials in case your shoes get stolen. Well, it's better for keeping your kids and some parents may be out there thinking, well, you're just trying to, invade their privacy. No, we're trying to protect our kids by doing these things. It's not a privacy matter. If we really care about our kids, we're protecting them.
yeah, awesome. This was a fantastic conversation. Any other call outs you guys wanted to make before we conclude?
I do want to say, I think we, if you always prepare for the worst and hope for the best, you'll always be ready for the most. Sometimes disasters aren't super loud or super disruptive. They can easily go from, as I said before, from an inconvenience to an emergency to a disaster. Like sometimes it does escalate, sometimes it's a no notice event. Um, but baseline, if you just try to acclimate yourself to where you're at and what resources you have around you, enjoy your vacation. This is not to scare anybody, but to make sure that even when you're traveling, that there is a 360 preparedness around you,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think one of the things is if you have a systematic mentality of having all of this prepared, or you have the mentality that, hey, I took an extra bag with everything that I heard in that podcast, and everything will be okay. Yeah, when you're going to the beach, that bag is in your hotel, right? If you have this more of a mentality
Right.
that always is with you, then you will be prepared if you're traveling, if you're here at home, if you're in transit to work or whatnot.
Yeah. No, and I just want to call out what you just said, because this is one of my biggest things, and we're going to do just a dedicated podcast episode just on this topic alone. But when we think about preparedness, so much times and I think with the way a lot of the marketing is done and around this prepper culture, it's stuff. It's all about stuff. It's about gear. Really, it's about a mindset, right? It's just being able to have an awareness and just being able to think and be decisive, right? It's not necessarily always about the stuff, but it's about
Right.
your mentality. We're going to dive deep into that into a future episode, because it's something I'm really passionate about. But it just, since you mentioned it, Anthony, I just want to, and really that kind of like went really nicely into some of my closing comments, because sometimes maybe people are fearful of travel, or even especially international travel, because it seems risky. That international travel isn't risky. Unprepared travel is risky. If you don't have the right mindset, you're not prepared. That's where the risk is. And so the goal is not to necessarily expect disaster. It's to respect the uncertainty, right? It's when we're talking about international travel, when you leave your country, you're leaving behind the systems that you're familiar with, and not being aware of that. That's where that risk comes in. So preparedness, having that prepared, a risk mindset, that's what makes you decisive, instead of being just dependent on these external systems. So good call out there. This was an awesome discussion. Before we conclude, though, Anthony, where can people go to stay in touch with you, to stay in touch with Disaster Operations Group? We're going to have you back, but people got to know how they can get in touch with you.
Thank you. So definitely go to our website, disasteroperationsgroup.com. There you can either book some time to contact us about any of our services. If you need any type of consultation, consultation is free. So please reach out. We also have Has Assist there as access. It is a free tool. It is available in 7 different languages. You can download it. There's no personal identifiable information you have to input. We created this because there's a level of preparedness that we do think and believe and really live by that should be accessible for everyone for free. It'll always be for free. So please reach out if you have any questions. And again, thank you both for having me on.
We always enjoy having you with us.
Thank you, Anthony. So before we conclude this episode of Disaster Class, please make sure you like, subscribe, you leave us that 5-star rating, give us that thumbs up, and be sure to comment. Tell us about something you appreciated, something you want to hear about, whatever it is, leave us a comment. And if you have a question, preparedness tip, or just want to chat, send us an email at disasterclass@instinctready.com, or drop us a message on our social media at Disaster Class Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Disaster Class. Stay educated.
Stay prepared.
Stay equipped.
And class dismissed. Hit the playgrounds, all. Disaster Class is brought to you by Instinct Ready Emergency Management. This episode was sponsored in part by Stop the Bleed Coalition. This episode was hosted by Jason Perez and Jason Martin, with a special appearance by Anthony Escoto. Disaster Class is directed, produced, and edited by Jason Perez. Copyright 2026, Instinct Ready Incorporated, all rights reserved.